Katherine Fernandez Rundle has been the state attorney in Miami-Dade County for 27 years. That's a very long time. This week, I spoke to the woman trying to unseat her, Melba Pearson, who spent 16 years as a prosecutor in that office. We began with a discussion about the past few weeks and how it has changed America since the murder of George Floyd and the growing calls to defund the police.
The way I look at it and the way I define it is, again, not abolishing police, because I don't think we're there as a country, we're there as a community. We still need to be able to address violent crime when it happens. You know, God forbid there's an active shooter situation or something like that. You need the police to respond. I don't know about you, I'm not gonna necessarily be the first one to run and try to tackle a shooter, right? That's not my lane. I'd rather leave that to someone who is trained and can do so effectively. But I think there's definitely a bigger discussion that needs to be had. And it's an ongoing discussion, at least in my work from over the last 20 years, of talking about how every time there's budget cuts, it's always social services, and that money is never returned back. So when we look at how underfunded our teachers are, the teachers are the key component to stopping the school to prison pipeline. If they have smaller class sizes, if they're better paid, they're able to, interact with students in a different way and hopefully spot issues before it has to escalate to the level of the criminal justice system. We should be funding more counselors, not more police officers in schools, because again, the counselors are able to intervene before something escalates to the point of violence or a problem. We have to look at the situation of the people who are experiencing homelessness. What are we really doing in a robust way to make sure people have access to housing, access to mental health treatment if they need it, access to addiction services to work through that and be able to fight addiction? And these are all aspects that directly have an impact on our quality of life and the criminal justice system. So if we invest in all of those things, the prevention, at the end of the day, prevention is better than the cure. The cure ends up being the criminal justice system. Prevention prevents us from even getting to that point, and that results in safer communities. So to me, a state attorney, especially being the state attorney of the largest jurisdiction in the state of Florida, fourth largest in the country, has a critical role when it comes to this discussion and making sure that people are educated and holding lawmakers accountable around what the financial priorities are for this community.
Well, one of the things that I think has also been amazing over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks since the George Floyd incident is the speed with which we've seen prosecutors in these different localities take action, not sort of like wait 2, 3, 4 years before we get a charging decision on whether an officer did something wrong. What role should the state attorney's office be playing in sort of making decisions in a more timely manner than we've seen up to now under the current state attorney, Katherine Fernandez Rundle?
The cases that we have looked at on a high profile level over the past few weeks clearly show the power of a prosecutor and clearly show that prosecutors are able to file charges when it comes to police officers who abuse the badge in an expeditious manner. And we have not enjoyed that here in Miami-Dade County. Actually, we've gotten the exact opposite, with my opponent having been in office for 27 years and never once charging a police officer for an on-duty killing. So when we look at, for instance, the Rayshard Brooks case in Atlanta, that is in line with what we see with civilians who end up in criminal situations. So if you have a civilian that is going to be charged with murder, usually within 24 to 48 hours of the murder, in many cases, the person is apprehended and, that the investigation moves in an expeditious manner. And that is why the community is so angry and upset, is because they see their friends, neighbors, other people in the community very quickly being pushed into the criminal justice system. But then when you have police officers who do similar behaviors, and I'm not talking about the good cops who wake up every day and do the best that they can every single day to protect the community. I'm talking about the small percentage of police officers who abuse the badge and abuse the people that they're sworn to protect and serve. They don't see the same accountability as the average person. And that's problematic because then it results in bad outcomes for the system as a whole, because people say, you know what, even though I was a survivor of a crime, even though I was a witness to a crime, I'm not going to participate in the criminal justice system by testifying or anything like that, because I don't feel that it's fair and it will give me, my loved ones, my community a fair shake. So in order to rebuild that trust, prosecutors have to act responsibly. I'm not saying rush to judgment or anything like that. You do a thorough investigation, but you can put pressure on making sure that the different entities get you evidence in a timely manner, get you reports in a timely manner, and then be able to charge these cases within a reasonable amount of time, 6 months or less, as opposed to the 3, 4, 5 years, and then Friday at 4 p.m. a memo comes out saying nothing to see.
Well, how long did you serve as a prosecutor?
Close to 16 years.
16 years as a prosecutor in that office, in Rundle's office.
Yes.
You know, I think, as you know, a prosecutor can talk themselves out of filing a charge rather easily. You can always come up with a reason not to charge.
Right.
You know, why do you think that that is the default for Katherine Fernandez Rundle in that office, in that, as you point out, in 27 years, she has never one time charged a police officer with an on-duty killing? How can you go through 27 years of that and not have that? Why is she afraid to charge police officers?
I'm not quite sure what the source of the fear is. I know that there's definitely a fear there. And a lot of times what I'm seeing as part of the justification, and what I'm sometimes hearing from my opponent, is that, oh, some of these cases can't be won. And at the end of the day, that's not the legal standard for filing a case. The legal standard for filing a case is whether or not you have enough evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. If you don't have that evidence, obviously you have no business filing the case. But whether or not a jury is going to agree with you is not the standard. If you have the evidence, you file the case and you let the people decide. That's why we have a jury system. I think more damage is done by not filing than to file, and then the jury system, came back with a not guilty verdict, because at the end of the day, you can't predict what the outcome is going to be. But you know what the outcome is going to be if you don't file.
Let's move to the Daron Rainey case, which just was 8 years ago this past week, where he died in custody. The circumstances of his death, still a lot of dispute, but clearly, he was horribly burned. It was what it appeared to be from after being left in a shower, a scalding hot shower for a period of time as some sort of form of punishment. A lot of disputing as to some of those facts, but 8 years later, no charges filed. What does that say to you, and why does that case resonate so much with you that you think this is indicative of a problem that you see in that office?
Because of the horror of these facts. I mean, when you see the pictures, it's not only is it disgusting, it's heartbreaking, because this was a human being and he did not deserve to die in that manner. And those officers needed to be held accountable for their actions. It's been made, I was speaking about this on a Facebook Live earlier this week, and several people who had worked in law enforcement, who had worked in the correction system, had put in the comments, there's actually protocol that you're supposed to have a person in the shower for only 6 minutes. He was left in there for 2 hours. So not only did you have a breach of protocol, you also have the fact that you had a man screaming for his life, begging to be let out, as he's left in the shower that reached temperatures of between 160 to 180 degrees. No human being can withstand that sort of conditions. So the abject cruelty that was done to this man is unacceptable. And to me, the question is, who are we as a community? What are we willing to condone? If we condone this, then that just sends a very clear sign about whose lives matter and what we value and what our morals are as a community. And I think this was a clear failing on the state attorney's office to send a message to people who abuse their authority, and to hold people accountable for a death that had no business happening.
We'll be right back.